Well, another year has passed, and now it has become time to talk about my personal top 10 favorite movies of 2018. Apologize for the delay in this video, I've been busy at work, but it's a very special day today. The video is now here at last, thank God Almighty, it is here at last. Let's begin. Number 10, Bad Times at the El Royale. Yep, this one I thought was actually a pretty fun movie. It was made by Drew Goddard, who's most famous for directing Cabin in the Woods, a very, very unique and special Halloween movie that you can watch every year. That came out back in 2012. This one is very much in a Quentin Tarantino-esque mold. Obviously, Tarantino had nothing to do with this movie, but it really feels like something he would make, with a timeline that jumps around, with often very twisted violence, and with characters with very odd motivations that you kind of delve into each one's backstory as it goes along. There's things that pop up early on that don't make sense at first, but are later explained, and everything really comes together in a very cool way in the end. Is this as good as some of the best Tarantino movies? Absolutely not. But this is a really interesting, pulpy crime thriller with a really interesting edge, set in, I guess it's the late 60s. They never really specify the exact year. You get an interesting intrigue of some famous figure who also isn't specified. You can assume it's maybe John Kennedy or something, having filmed that possibly embarrassed them, and a whole bunch of people fighting for that highly valuable film. All really cool, and it really comes together very well. This movie was just good enough to make this list. Even if it's at the bottom of the list, it's still one you should check out. Number 9, Creed 2. Creed from 2015 proved to be a really successful kind of revamp of the Rocky saga, set in the same universe as the Rocky movies, but this time focusing on a completely different character, Adonis Creed, played by Michael B. Jordan. It was a really good movie. A couple years later, we finally get a sequel, and it perfectly matches the first one. This time, we see Adonis Creed, the son of Apollo Creed, facing off against the son of the man that killed his father back in Rocky IV. That's a very interesting premise for this movie. You also mostly see the evolution of Adonis Creed as a character as you see him get married, become a father, and eventually stand up for himself as the champion in the ring. It follows the basic Rocky movie formula. Stallone is back as Rocky Balboa, and we get another fantastic performance from him. Shows that he hasn't lost any of his talent well into his senior years. What can I say? If you're a fan of boxing movies, you're a fan of the previous movie, you're a fan of the Rocky movies, you will highly enjoy Creed 2. I personally really like this flick. Number 8, Bumblebee. Yep, we finally got it. After decades and decades and decades of waiting, we finally got a good Transformers movie. We finally got a live-action Transformers movie that will actually entertain someone whose IQ is higher than -5. Yes, I fucking massively hate all of Michael Bay's Transformers movies. They are absolute trash. The plots make no sense, the pacing is atrocious, the humor is childish, they're racist, sexist, the characters are horrendously unlikable, they're just terrible movies, and for the previous decade, it just pained my heart watching them continue to make hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars with no talent or effort put into them. That's why I was so ecstatic when I heard that Travis Knight was going to be directing a Transformers movie, with Michael Bay nowhere to be found. Travis Knight, of course, is most known for directing the masterpiece from 2016, Koba and the Two Strings. So did he pull it off? Absolutely. That said, this is not really quite a perfect movie, but it's certainly a good one. It's set in the 80s. It's presumably a prequel to the Bay movies, but it's also disconnected enough from them that if you're like me and absolutely despise them, you can watch this movie on its own and completely ignore them. The character designs are intentionally much closer to the original G1 designs from the 80s show than they are like the ones in the Bay movies. Don't know if that's a continuity error. You kind of also explains how Bumblebee lost his voice box. It being set in the 80s, which of course is the decade that the Transformers cartoon originated, it really takes advantage of that, and there's a lot of 80s nostalgia pandering throughout it. The plot of this movie is very similar, I would say, to E.T. That's probably the closest movie I could compare this one to, where you kind of have a human who finds an alien visitor who's not very communicative for different reasons, but same thing, kind of slowly over it form a bond. We get a girl, the main lead, who's played by Haley Atwell, is actually a genuinely really likable main personality. And even though she's a very pretty young woman, the movie doesn't constantly feel the need to sexualize her and have her do these really obnoxious model poses in almost every scene they're in, the way Michael Bay did with every attractive woman in his movies, which is one of the most frustrating things in them. And I'm a straight dude, and I love looking at the female body as much as any straight dude, but if I want to watch hot chicks, there's porn all over the internet. And seriously, Michael Bay, if you just want to photograph hot women, I respect that. Go direct porn. Don't be directing Transformers movies if that's what all you want to do. No, but that's getting sidetracked. Everything in this movie is very small scale compared to the Transformers movies. We never get like a city-wide disaster. The whole planet's never at stake. And that's really a good thing. Sometimes smaller is better. So many big movies today feel the need they got to top their predecessor by making it bigger and bigger and bigger, where you just have more things going on, and oftentimes they're very poorly balanced. Here, we get a very small character arc where we just have two random Decepticons we have to deal with, and it makes you really care about the main characters they've developed. Bumblebee is better developed as a character in this movie, which is under 2 hours, than he was as a main character in all 5 of Michael Bay's pieces of trash put together. You end this movie actually caring about Bumblebee, caring about the Transformers, actually giving a damn about this movie's plot. It was such a breath of fresh air having a Transformers movie by someone who actually respected the audience. And even though it in some ways is more of a kid's movie than the previous movies, it actually is more mature. It feels like it's written for children by someone who respects them, rather than feeling like it was written by 12-year-olds. Not feeling like something that's pandering to the worst instincts of young children, but one that feels like it respects their best instincts. And it isn't perfect. It does drag a little bit in spots. Some things could have been a bit better developed. Is this a great movie? All things considered, no. But I appreciate this movie so much for what it tried to do, and really tried to make a Transformers movie that actually respected fans of the franchise. Thank you, Traverse Knight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I look forward to your next project. Number 7, Mowgli. 2018's Mowgli is, of course, an adaptation of Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book from 1894, about a boy named Mowgli who has to live among the animals, much like I do right here. It was sadly dumped onto Netflix because Warner Brothers didn't think it would do well with audiences confusing it for the 2016 Disney version of A Jungle Book. This version, however, is both much darker and much more faithful to the original source material, that being Kipling's original novel. And in my opinion, this is the best version of A Jungle Book that has ever been made. It's not only easily the most faithful, but it also feels like it's best in touch with the deep themes of the story, rather than just feeling like it's entertaining kids with different animal personalities. I already did a quick thoughts on this video, so I'm not going to repeat too much of what I said, but we get really great performances by Andy Serkis, who also directed the movie, Christian Bale, Cate Blanchett, Benedict Cumberbatch, who all really give really amazing animal performances, and we get a young actor playing Mowgli, who easily surpasses the young actor's work in the Disney version. Nothing against that kid, but sorry, it's true. This is a really dark, intense thriller, has pretty good animation, even if it's a little bit behind the Disney version due to a smaller budget. But if you have a Netflix account, you can already watch this movie for free. If you haven't, you really need to get on that right now. Mowgli is an excellent flick. I wouldn't show this to the little kids, though. This is definitely the Jungle Book for adults, and that's an awesome thing. Number 6, A Quiet Place. This was definitely one of the best horror movies this year. Hell, it's one of the best horror movies I've seen in quite a while. A Quiet Place has a very interesting premise of a world besieged by these bulletproof, hideous abomination of creatures that kind of look like the thing on Godzilla's tail from Shin Godzilla, who've kind of taken over the world and will attack you if you make too much noise, forcing everyone to be really, really quiet. Because of that, this movie has very, very little dialogue, and it really paces itself extraordinarily well, really feeling tense and atmospheric, and you feel the terror in the hearts of the characters throughout this entire flick. Not just because the effects on the monsters were good, although they were, but it really builds up this world and kind of justifies it. Before really getting really into it, you still don't know exactly how the world got this way. It's not really full of too much backstory, but you really don't need that. You're kind of just put into this situation, put into this world that's gone to hell, and you're kind of just watch these characters try to survive it, try to live through it, and it all really works. You really care if these characters live or die, and even when they don't talk, it actually has some really good character moments in this. A Quiet Place is a really strong original horror movie. There are very few good original horror movies that come out anymore. A Quiet Place really should get a watch. Number 5, Black Panther. See, I put Black Panther on this list. Now no one can ever call me racist. Okay, that was a joke. But seriously, Black Panther is a genuinely really, really good movie. What I really liked about this flick is how it fit really well into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and really how it feels in some ways really different than other films, feeling like a really good power struggle for this fantasy kingdom of Wakanda. You have really cool performances. Michael B. Jordan really gives another fantastic performance as this movie's main villain, and it gives him kind of a sympathetic backstory to really develop why he is the way he is, but at the same time also showing that he's taken his hatred and allowed his bad experience in life to push him over the edge, which makes him sympathetic, but at the same time, very clearly the villain and someone you can root for the hero to defeat in the end. While I think this movie has been a tad overrated by some people who kind of just like it for its representation or what have you, it's still a genuinely cool fantasy flick. It still really fits into the Marvel Cinematic Universe really well, and I actually really look forward to future movies set in the Kingdom of Wakanda. Wakanda forever. Number 4, Incredibles 2. Incredibles 2 is a movie that had a lot to live up to. In 2004, when the first Incredibles came out, it was both a huge hit at the box office and became a beloved favorite for millions of people, myself included. The first Incredibles is honestly one of my all-time favorite animated movies. Does the sequel live up to the original? Not quite, but it is a absolutely worthy entry. And that is a really high achievement when you consider the quality of the original movie. It's a very somewhat similar story, but this time we kind of switched the roles with Helen in the role that Bob was in the first movie, and Bob kind of being Mr. Mom playing with the kids, and of course with Jack's highly developing powers, that is a much bigger responsibility than it would be for a normal parent. The family dynamics that made the original so good are back here. The kids feel like real kids. They're not always angels, but real kids really aren't. And that feels like you're watching a real family. Occasionally they can be out of control, but sometimes real families are. But they all in the end get together with a really interesting new threat, and the end action sequences really take advantage of all the computing power upgrades that have happened since the original. The action is really, really innovative and intense. This is probably the best looking action in an animated movie I have ever seen. It will be very difficult for any future entry if they come out to even top this. Although The Incredibles 2 is not quite on the level of last year's Coco, it's still a more than worthy follow-up to The Incredibles and a worthy entry into the Pixar canon. Pixar has once again, after so many times, delivered a genuinely really good family movie. Number 3, SpiderMan Into the SpiderVerse. Seriously, how in the fuck is this the best Spider-Man movie that has come out since 2004? How the hell is that even possible? But it is. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was made by Sony Pictures Animation, an animation company known for duds like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and, of course, the Emoji Movie. You'd figure a movie made by them with Sony's Spider-Man license would have to be just a generic cash grab. And yet, This is the best Spider-Man movie in a very long time. We finally are introduced to the Miles Morales version of Spider-Man, who's a character that's been in the comics for almost 20 years now. It's kind of a new version of Spider-Man that's different than Peter Parker, but Peter Parker is also back in this movie. We finally get a Spider-Man in this movie, as in a seasoned Spider-Man who's well into his late 30s, whereas all the previous live-action movies, regardless of the age of the actor who played him, had a Spider-Man who was either in high school or in college. But what's really cool about this movie is how it takes advantage of the whole multi-verse concept and how you get all these alternate versions of Spider-Man from all these different places. And what's really great is it doesn't take that much time developing them all. In a quick-fire fashion, just goes through all their origins, and that's really all you need. All these characters are really cool. You want, like, future movies that are just based on these characters. You get Haley Atwell, who's the second time she's in this video, actually, playing kind of female version of Spider-Man. You get alternate versions of Peter Parker. You get one voiced by Nicolas Cage, who's like a noir Nazi fighting one. You get one that's like anime inspired. It's all wacky as hell, but it all really works. And Miles Morales is also a really well-developed character. You care about this version of Spider-Man. You want him to succeed. All right? You want to see future adventures with this version of Spider-Man. I don't know if they will make a follow-up to it or whether they'll keep the multiverse concept or instead just make a movie focusing on Miles Morales in one universe. And either could really work. And I also say the animation style in this, it's not quite as polished as Incredibles 2. The budget wasn't quite as big. But what's really cool about it is it's designed to look like the panels of a comic book, even though it's computer animated. It has kind of a sketchy style to it, which is meant to look like it was colored in. And that is really, really cool. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is just a fast, fun, enjoyable movie that is easily one of my favorite movies of 2018. Number 2, Avengers Infinity War. You know how I said earlier in this video that movies that are really big and have a lot of different characters and try to really top the previous movie in terms of just big epic scale oftentimes feel unfocused, incoherent, and unbalanced? That is so not the case with Avengers Infinity War. It is such a credit to the Russo brothers that with all these different big actors, all these different characters, all these different elements that all come together, how well balanced all of it seems. Avengers Infinity War is just an amazing movie. It is huge in its scale. It has a $300+ million budget, and you see every bit of that. You go to all these different planets, all these different locations. You have so many different heroes who have so many different unique powers who all have to meet each other and work with each other. And what brings it all together is probably easily the best villain the Marvel Cinematic Universe has ever given us. Thanos is incredible. First of all, the animation on him is stunning. He's probably the most photorealistic looking digital character I have ever seen in any movie. I heard people were surprised when I told them that he was computer animated. You look at him and you know he has to be computer animated because you don't know how else he could be made, but he looks so real, you just totally believe he's there. And even if his motivation is a tad convoluted, it develops that motivation. It makes you understand this character and why he thinks the way he does and why he's willing to do what he does. It is almost his movie. Rather than any one of the many heroes, it feels like a movie that is told from the villain's perspective. And that is awesome. Many Marvel Cinematic Universe movies have had pretty generic villains. Does anyone remember the villain in Thor: The Dark World? Yeah, neither do I. Totally generic, totally uninteresting. Thanos is completely the opposite. And the ending of this movie, that they were willing to end such a major movie on such a depressing cliffhanger, is absolutely amazing to me. I would never have expected to see an ending like that from a major Hollywood movie. They always need that happy ending, typically. But not this one. And that's what is so awesome about this movie. It both manages to fulfill everything the audience wants while also subverting their expectations. Avengers Infinity War is a big budget summer blockbuster done extremely well. I cannot wait for Endgame. I cannot wait for any entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe after this. Marvel did a great job and deserved a huge high five. This movie is marvelous. And the number one best movie of 2018, Annihilation. If you're one of the many, many people who skipped Annihilation when it premiered in theaters, you have totally given up your right, ever again, to complain that Hollywood doesn't do enough original ideas. Because here with Annihilation, you got everything you wanted. You had an extremely talented director in Alex Garland write and direct a really brilliant and original science fiction movie, and yet very few people went to see it. You want to know why Hollywood keeps pumping out unoriginal remakes, sequels that nobody wanted? This is why. Because great original science fiction movies like Annihilation frequently don't do well. The public seems to ignore them and then hypocritically complain, there's too many remakes. All right, Hollywood doesn't do anything original. Annihilation is an awesome movie that, like I said, is totally original. You have really, really tense character moments and really creepy special effects. The monsters in this movie are some of the best ever. I don't want to spoil it. It's really hard to describe this movie too much without giving out too much spoilers, but there are some creatures that come out of nowhere that will just leave you shocked. And the cast of this movie, all women. And yet it doesn't feel like Ghostbusters Answer the Call. It doesn't feel like it's pushing any kind of feminist agenda. It just feels like they're all women because why not? The way these women kind of try to work off each other, have all these different goals, but eventually some of them turn on each other. It is really gripping throughout. The main story, you've never really seen anything like this. It feels like a plot from the old Twilight Zone show, but one with a budget and modern special effects to actually do the concept justice. Annihilation is awesome. It's scary. It's thought-provoking. It's really well acted. The characters are unlikable at times, but also really interesting and understandable. Annihilation is the best movie of 2018. If you haven't seen it yet, go see Annihilation. You will not regret it. Thank you, everyone who stuck by me throughout 2018. I hope 2019 is awesome for you, all of you. Bye-bye.